Presenting now is Daniel Kumapayi from the Akojopo Music Foundation. Daniel Kumapayi is a public and arts administrator committed to supporting the next generation of arts leaders across the African continent. He is the 2025 Association of Arts Administration Educators EDI Research Fellow and recently presented his research integrating Pan-African arts music in U.S. orchestral programming at the annual conference. Daniel was also selected as a speaker at Arnova, where he presented Guerrilla Tactics in Nigerian Arts Administration, Strategic Adaptation in a Complex Landscape. He holds an MPA from the University of Illinois, Chicago, and a BM from the University of Michigan. As founder of Akojopo, he supports Pan-African musicians and cultural leaders globally. Please welcome Daniel Kumapayi as he presents Integrating Pan-African Art Music in the U.S. Orchestral Programming, Insights from African Arts Administrators and the Àkójọpọ Commissioning Project.
Thank you very much for that wonderful introduction. I hope everyone is doing well today. I do not need to introduce myself because you already did that. So again, thank you very much. So let me go to my next slide. So today we'll be covering these 7 topics. So let's get started. So my introduction today is, until the lion tells a story, the hunter will always be the hero. African culture is deeply rooted in oral tradition, and while that's a powerful part of our identity, it also means that much of our history has been written and sometimes distorted through Western perspectives. I left Nigeria at the age of 5 and didn't return until 15 years later. And until that point, all I knew was Western classical music. But that trip back and an email correspondence in 2019 with the late Professor Akojopo, widely regarded as the father of African art music, it marked the beginning of my understanding of just how much has been excluded from classical music canon in which I was trained, one that I thought I knew, but I had so much more to learn. I began to understand the extent of the erasure and inaccessibility of this body of work, specifically African art music. And this journey pulled me into a rabbit hole, one that led me to dedicate my professional life to this field and one that really inspired what Akojopo is today. So I'd like to define what my interpretation of Pan-African art music before we dive deeper. Professor Kofi Agawu defines art music as music self-consciously composed by individuals, often notated, usually rehearsed and performed by skilled practitioners for a non-participating and minimally participating audience. For me, I see Pan-African art music as convergence of 2 powerful forces. The Pan-Africanism, a movement that seeks to unite African and Afro-diaspora communities in art music. Broadly, Pan-African art music is defined as art music that is distinctly African in sound and character and draws upon African and Afrocentric musical resources such as the rhythm, languages, melodies, harmonic frameworks, compositional structures, and traditional instruments. So I asked this question because, why is this important? This shift is not only about inclusion, it's about agency, accountability, cultural stewardship. Empowering culturally grounded leaders is a necessary step towards dismantling tokenism, advancing equity, and ensuring that Pan-African art music is preserved, respected, and allowed to flourish on its own terms. This work is more than a job. It's a calling, and for African arts administrators and practitioners engaged with this music, not out of obligation or a trend, but as a form of organic expression of their identity, their tradition, and their purpose. While U.S. orchestras often approach African or Black composers through the lens of diversity, inclusion, initiatives, the responsibility to shape African art music ultimately lies with us. We're not waiting for change. We have to create it ourselves. We are the present carrying forward the dreams of our past forebears. And without culturally rooted leadership, the future of this field is uncertain, and the opportunities for Pan-African artists are even more so. So I'd like to touch upon some of the literature review I did. When I interviewed a Nigerian arts administrator, he shared how in his doctoral studies, It focused heavily on Western literature, even though he was based in Nigeria doing a PhD in arts administration in the northern parts of the country. They had very little attention to African-centered approaches in literature and arts administration. This reflects Woodson's idea in The Miseducation of the Negro, that African-descended people are often denied knowledge of their own history and contributions. Karobo explains that African art music grew under colonial rule, with composers trying to keep their cultural roots while also working within global music systems. Professor Akojopo showed that this balance by blending African styles with Western forms, promoting cultural pride instead of just fitting in. Still, African composers are rarely studied in Western music scholarship. And US orchestras, I've seen that their work are often limited to special occasions such as Black History Month, rather than being part of the regular programming. These token efforts don't address the deeper inequalities in the field. Scholars like Clark and Pellerin offer ways forward based on Pan-African and Afrocentric ideas. Clark sees Pan-Africanism as a way to reclaim culture, while Pellerin supports creating knowledge together with African communities. These approaches stress African voices and challenge Western dominance. African music in this light becomes both a form of cultural expression and resistance. Thinkers like Fanon and Showande also highlighted music's role in healing and community. Together, they call for a new kind of orchestral programming rooted in African voices and values. This research used a qualitative approach where I conducted semi-structured interviews with 11 participants, ranging from administrators, composers, conductors, musicians, and cultural workers from Africa and alongside the diaspora. Some of these were graduate students, doctoral, and professors. I also engaged in participant observation with Akojopo, taking part in the concert planning, programming decisions, and also our community events. This is a case study and analysis of Akojopo's 2023 commissioning project, which I will provide further contextualized findings. My data was analyzed using thematic analysis, content analysis, and grounded theory. Grounded theory meaning I'm starting with the data and I'm building towards a theory rather than testing an existing theory. I use transcripts from interviews, internal documents from the organization to examine reoccurring themes and patterns to provide an explanation for my research. So the first research question that I went to ask was, how do arts administrators within Pan-African communities approach programming African art music? Through my interviews, it became very clear that Pan-African arts administrators approach programming with deep sensitivity to authenticity, cultural representation, and the complexities of identities in both the music and its presentation. One key theme that was the debate was around authenticity. Some participants I interviewed emphasized that authenticity lies in how the music is written, not necessarily who writes it. As one of the people I interviewed put it, it's not about who's writing the music, but how it's written. This view embraces a more inclusive and understanding of Pan-African art music, focusing on musical elements like rhythm, harmony, and form. But others, however, stress that lived experience matters. They felt that authenticity is deeply tied to the composer's cultural background. They argue that those who are raised within African traditions often carry more intuitive grasp of the music's social and political context. This tension between cultural understanding and cultural origin reflects an ongoing conversation about what truly makes this music African. Elitism was another issue raised. While participants noted a bias towards Western-trained or white composers, even within African context, one respondent remarked that African orchestras often privilege Western models, making it harder for African composers to be recognized on their own terms. Communication styles also emerge as a barrier. African music often relies on non-verbal rhythmic communication, which can clash with the more structured and scripted norms of Western orchestras. This disconnect can lead to misinterpretation and frustration in collaborative settings. The cultural appropriation was another concern. Participants warned against programming African art music without acknowledging its historical and cultural roots, noting the risk of erasure and misrepresentation when institutions treat it as a trend rather than a tradition. Finally, for many composers, especially in the diaspora, are still in the process of defining what African art music is today. They're navigating between honoring tradition and responding to the modern influences. Some expressed the lack of clear frameworks, while others highlighted the ongoing role of intercultural experimentation and improvisation. which often challenges the rigidity of classical forms. In short, arts administrators approach programming as a delicate balancing act, one that must account for identity, representation, institutional policies, and an evolving definition of Pan-African art music itself. My second research question was, what challenges and opportunities exist for U.S. orchestras in integrating Pan-African art music while maintaining the cultural authenticity? Integrating African art music into U.S. orchestras presents significant challenges. And throughout my interviews, some key challenges is the lack of familiarity with African music's complex and cyclical rhythms and emotional depth. Many U.S. orchestras struggle to capture the rhythmic nuances within Western classical frameworks, leading to a temporal disconnect that undermines the music essence. Cultural bias also persists, with a preference for Western trained composers and a tendency again to tokenize the African art music as a symbolic rather than substantive programming. Despite these obstacles, there are important opportunities, including African art music can diversify audiences and foster meaningful cultural exchange. Its rhythmic complexity and emotional resonance offers a unique and enriching addition to the orchestral repertoire. African music, improvisational and spontaneous qualities challenge the rigid structures of Western classical music and encourages orchestras to adopt a more flexible and adaptive approach that can enhance a musician's skill and broaden their artistic expression. Sustained long-term collaboration with African musicians and composers is crucial to overcoming these barriers. This includes moving beyond, again, the idea of tokenism and establishing ongoing partnership, artistic residencies, integrating African artists into decision-making roles. Financial and institutional support is necessary to ensure that this music becomes lasting and respected as part of the orchestral programming. In practice, combining educational outreach with strategic partnerships, authentic community engagement can realize these opportunities. Ultimately, embracing African art music offers U.S. orchestras a chance to reshape the classical music landscape into one that is more inclusive and reflective of a global cultural diversity. So how can cross-cultural collaboration support the long-term inclusion of Pan-African art music in orchestral programs? The interviews I had revealed that long-term partnerships, educational outreach, and financial support are sustainable. The artistic residencies and ongoing collaboration, again, foster the idea of deep cultural understanding. Educational outreach in schools and communities will build audiences, future audiences, and musicians who appreciate African music and traditions, helping shift it from the margins to a central place in orchestral life. Institutional commitment is also crucial. Partnerships must include strategic programming, shared decision-making, and a continuous collaboration to authentically integrate African music into orchestral identity. Creating shared cultural spaces enables meaningful collaboration and storytelling and a mutual respect, allowing African art music to become integral and respected part of orchestral traditions. In summary, sustained collaborations and investment ensure African art music moves beyond occasional inclusion to becoming a core element of orchestral programming. The African Art Music Commissioning Project in 2023 serves as a very crucial case study to address the limited literature on my research topic. Through this project, I will share the insights and internal process and strategies that we use as an organization to employ to enhance African representation within orchestral setting. By examining this project and its approach to commissioning and showcasing African composers, we aim to reveal lessons applicable to broader arts administrators' practices and contribute to a more inclusive orchestral landscape. This project was led by Dr. Alaba Ilasami, Shea Ajibade Adirayo, and myself. And the team was also supported by the selection committee and workshop curators, such as Dr. Branco, Dr. Uluanti, and Dr. Lawanga. This commissioning project offers a vital lens into how African arts administrators are reshaping programming and dissemination of African art music. Through the annual Orintuntu concert series, Akojopo operationalizes its mission to fill gaps in access, education, and representation by intentionally programming newly commissioned works that are rooted in African cultural practices. The 2023 edition represented a strategic shift, not only in scale, reaching 14 countries, but also in deeper commitment to intercultural dialogue. Speaking on this shift, one of our team members noted this project was not just about commissioned music. It was about creating a space where Black and African people could see themselves in this art form, where the music sounded and felt like this. This insight underscores how African arts administrators are not simply curating content. They're shaping the narrative authority over what African art music is and can be. This addresses the research question earlier about how African arts administrators approach programming African art music within their organizations. In our model, when we had our global call, we had a blind selection process led by a review committee. From 52 international submissions and 10 composers, 8 were chosen to have works commissioned for this concert. In the process, we had virtual workshops that followed were more than compositional feedback. There were cultural immersion sessions. As one of our team members explained, we didn't just ask the composers to write African music, we asked them to engage in it. This meant reading, field work, asking questions, really understanding the music beyond the surface aesthetics. This approach affirms the organization's commitment to cultural authenticity while remaining open to non-African composers who approach this idiom with intellectual humility and methodological rigor. Such intentional mentorship is particularly instructive for U.S. orchestras, considering the inclusion of African art music. As one of our team members remarked, one thing we keep hearing is, where do we find these pieces? Where can we get this music? So this was a way in which we could step in and say, we'll help you find it. We'll help you understand it. This response highlights a key challenge for U.S. orchestras, access, and also for people within the continent. The issue is not only locating works, but also understanding the musical idioms in which they are written. Our solution was twofold: to create a publishing infrastructure that provides both the scores and cultural context, but second, to ensure that composers include performance notes, explaining the use of non-Western instruments, alternative tuning, rhythmic systems. These practices offer a clear answer to the research question: what challenges and opportunities exist for U.S. orchestras in integrating African art music while maintaining cultural authenticities? While orchestras may face difficulties in performer training, repertoire comprehension, our model provides a scalable blueprint for culturally responsible inclusion. This concert was held at Muson, featuring 11 works and drew a large and enthusiastic audience. 4 composers were in attendance. And overall, it was a very great program. In closing, let me just go to my last slide. In closing, I would just like to say that there's a significant divide over what defines African art music. And in terms of Pan-African art music, it's often interpreted through Western lens, which can lead to underrepresentation of African composers. And the lack of African voices in global arts administration limits the authenticity and depth of orchestral programming. I would like to continue further, but I think I'm over time. So what I would like to say is thank you very much, everyone. I do have a paper version of this. This QR code does not work, but if you do want the full paper, I will put my email in the chat here. Thank you so much for the opportunity to present. And thank you, Dr. Ayuinde.
Thank you so much, Daniel. Thank you. So we have a few minutes to engage Daniel. Yeah. So while we're waiting for that, okay, in case you have questions, please. Okay, well, thank you so much, Daniel. And I can say I'm also part of this big stuff. So I'm so happy to see this interesting and fascinating conversation coming from you yourself, and the way it is presented. Thank you so much. Thank you. Great one. Thank you.